The reading of my father's will was meant to be a ceremony, but I had turned it into a financial execution. Today wasn't about mourning, it was about settling a decade-long account. For 10 years, I had been the ghost in our family's empire, the silent partner, the invisible hand that kept the machinery humming while my brother Marcus treated our legacy as his personal amusement fund. He saw himself as the heir apparent, the golden son destined for the throne. But I saw the truth he refused to acknowledge. Empires aren't inherited through bloodlines, they're earned through sacrifice. While he was building his image at yacht parties in Monaco, I was rebuilding supply chains after midnight cyber attacks. While he was signing tabs he couldn't afford, I was signing deals that saved the company millions. This room, this moment, was my final audit. The remote control in Mr. Alden's hand wasn't just for the projector, it was the detonator for a financial bomb I had spent years carefully constructing around my brother's arrogance. The explosion wouldn't be loud, but its shockwaves would redefine our family forever. I wasn't in a cathedral, but a law firm's silent chamber. The air smelled of old paper, polished wood, and the sharp, metallic scent of quiet ambition. My older brother, Marcus, and his wife, Chloe, had dressed for a coronation, not a funeral. He wore a suit that screamed new money, with its aggressive cut and sheen, while Chloe shimmered in a dress worth more than most of our junior executives' annual salaries. They weren't grieving. They were investors waiting for their dividend check to clear. I watched them from my seat, the same seat I'd occupied for a decade, off to the side, near the wall, the place reserved for supporting players. 4 years, I accepted that position, believing my work would speak for itself. I was the human calculator, the operational savant who could pinpoint waste in a budget with a glance and untangle logistical nightmares before breakfast. Marcus called me that once, patting my head at a charity gala. Our little human calculator, he'd announced to his friends, as if introducing a fascinating pet. He thought it was a compliment. I knew it was a dismissal. He adjusted his cufflinks now, platinum monograms that cost more than my first car. The gesture was practiced, a performance of effortless wealth. He leaned over the glossed mahogany table, his breath carrying the peaty aroma of a 25-year-old scotch he'd undoubtedly sampled in the firm's partner lounge. "Just sit tight, little sister," he whispered, his voice a conspiratorial murmur meant only for me, yet loud enough for the nearest board member to overhear. "Once this tedious formality is over, we'll find a quiet corner of the company for you. Something stable. Something with a view. Accounts receivable needs a reliable, detail-oriented pair of hands." He smiled then, a flash of perfect veneers. He thought the family empire was his birthright, a prize merely for being born first, for possessing the right chromosomes. What he didn't know, what he couldn't comprehend through his fog of entitlement, was that I had already calculated his downfall to the last decimal. I had mapped every failure, logged every overstep, and tallied every cent of squandered capital. His empire was built on credit. Mine was built on forensic accounting. I didn't argue. I didn't stiffen. Instead, I felt a glacial calm settle deep into my bones, a familiar focus that usually arrived in the eye of a corporate storm. This was just another crisis to manage, albeit a deeply personal one. My gaze drifted from Marcus's smug face to our father's lifelong lawyer and confidant, Mr. Alden. He stood with a statue's stillness by the door, a man who had navigated our family's legal wars for 40 years. In his liver-spotted hand, he held not a legal pad, but a slim, black remote control. Our eyes met across the tense air. No words passed between us. None were needed. I gave one slow, deliberate blink. A signal. A confirmation. That was all it took. The massive screen embedded in the wall, ostensibly there to display a bland slideshow of family photos. Father fishing, father at graduations, father cutting ribbons, flickered to life with a soft hum. But the image that resolved wasn't a montage of sentimental memories. It was my father, Charles Vance, seated in the worn leather chair of his private study, the one he'd refused to ever let Marcus redecorate. He wasn't smiling. He looked directly into the camera lens with an unnerving intensity, the same flinty stare he'd wielded before announcing mass layoffs or ripping up a corrupt contract. This was not the gaze of a peaceful patriarch. This was the stare of a prosecutor, Marcus. His recorded voice filled the soundproofed room, crisp, clean, and utterly devoid of sentimental warmth. You have spent a decade viewing this company, my life's work, as your personal, unlimited line of credit. You interpreted my financial patience as emotional approval. You were mistaken. The words hung in the air, each one a carefully placed stone. The image on the screen then performed a smooth, digital split. My father's stern visage shrank to the upper corner, replaced by the stark, scrolling lines of a financial ledger. The numbers glowed a damning, urgent shade of crimson, a visual hemorrhage of red ink. Let us review the portfolio, Father's voice continued, adopting the dry, clinical tone of an auditor presenting findings. Project Aurora. Your foray into sustainable tech. Capital injected, $3.1 million. Status, defunct, assets sold for scrap. The boutique hotel in Aspen, purchased because you enjoyed the skiing. Investment, $2.5 million. Status, foreclosed by creditors 18 months ago. Your personal brand ambassador team, a euphemism for your entourage of yes-men and lifestyle consultants. Annual burn rate, $650,000. For what? To teach you how to use social media. The scrolling list continued, a grim parade of vanity projects and fiscal negligence. The failed vineyard in Napa, the esports team that never played a match, the angel investment in a company that turned out to be an elaborate Ponzi scheme. Already chilled by the air conditioning, seemed to grow colder by several degrees. A collective stillness seized the assembled board members and family advisors. Chloe, who had been subtly admiring the sharp angle of her jawline in the reflection of the polished table, froze. Her practiced, socialite smile, a tool she wielded like a weapon, vanished, wiped away as if by an unseen hand. This was no longer a gentle chiding from beyond the grave. This was a public vivisection, a balance sheet of their failures displayed in 4K resolution for everyone who mattered in our world to witness. I watched the color drain from her cheeks, replaced by a waxy pallor. For the first time, she looked her age. I wasn't indulging you, son, Father's voice intoned, pulling the focus back to his corner of the screen. I wasn't funding your lifestyle out of some blind, paternal affection. I was conducting a long-term, real-world audit of your judgment, your character, and your fundamental understanding of value. I provided the capital, ample capital, to see what you would build. Would you construct a lasting asset, or would you simply incinerate the resources? He paused, letting the question resonate in the dead air. You chose conflagration. Every time. He gave you the rope, Marcus, and you didn't just hang yourself with it. You meticulously wove it into an intricate net, stretched it across a canyon of your own making, and then confidently stepped forward, expecting it to carry your weight. The metaphor was brutal in its precision. The scrolling ledger of red numbers vanished, replaced by a high-resolution scan of a legal document. Its header was stark and unambiguous, convertible note and equity pledge agreement. The font was dense, the paragraphs thick with legal jargon. At the bottom of the final page, taking up far too much space, was Marcus's flamboyant, looping signature in blue fountain pen ink, a signature he treated as a work of art, not a binding commitment. You remember this document, I trust, Father's recorded voice said, a hint of something almost like pity coloring the edges of his words. 3 years ago. Spring. You found yourself in a rather significant liquidity crisis following that Unfortunate incident at the casino in Monte Carlo. The one involving the diplomatic son and the sports car in the fountain. You needed a wire transfer, and you needed it to be discreet, to bypass the usual oversight. You came to me, panicked. I had Peter draw this up. You signed it in my study at 2 in the morning, complaining about the headache from the champagne. You didn't read past the first line. You never do. The screen zoomed in with a subtle digital whir, centering on a specific subclause, 7b. The text became pixel sharp. It states, Father's voice echoed slightly in the silent room, as if he were reading it for the first time himself, that upon the borrower's total financial obligations to the Vance Family Trust exceeding the sum of $5 million, all equity claims, voting rights, and future inheritance interests in Vance Global Logistics are immediately and irrevocably forfeited. Furthermore, said equity shall automatically transfer in full to any party who satisfies said outstanding debt on behalf of the trust. The words were dry, legalistic, and utterly catastrophic. The silence that followed was so profound, so absolute, I could hear the faint, high-pitched hum of the LED screen's processors and the rustle of wool as a board member shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of comprehended ruin. Last quarter, Father continued, his tone shifting back to that of a news anchor reporting facts, your combined debts, the sum of the personal loans listed here, the unpaid credit lines guaranteed by the company, and the direct losses from your portfolio, crossed that $5 million threshold. Technically, upon that event, the company's legal department could have moved to seize your condo, your cars, your art collection. We could have launched a very public, very messy lawsuit. He let the image of that humiliation hang for a moment. But someone intervened before I could authorize that action. Someone stepped in during the final hours of the last fiscal year. Someone liquidated their own accumulated performance equity grants, cashed out a decade's worth of deferred bonuses, and emptied a personal savings account they had been nurturing since they were a teenager. Someone wrote a check to the trust to settle your account in full, to clear the books. The screen changed one last time. It showed a scanned image of a bank transfer receipt. The details were crystal clear. Amount: $5,200,000. Sender: Eleanor Marie Vance. Recipient: Vance Family Trust Debt Service Account. The date stamp was from 3 months ago, a week after Father had entered hospice care. You didn't inherit your share of this company, Marcus. Father's final words were delivered in a near whisper, yet they hit the quiet room with the physical force of a gavel strike. You sold it. You traded it, piece by piece, for empty bottles, bad bets, and the hollow admiration of people who called you sir only until your credit failed. And your sister, the human calculator you so casually dismissed, now holds the sole deed to every share you thought was yours. She didn't receive it as a gift. She acquired it. She purchased it, at full market value, with currency you will never understand, discipline, patience, and silent, compounding competence. The video feed expanded again to fill the screen with my father's face. He looked past the camera, as if addressing me directly, and a warmth I hadn't seen in years, a warmth I thought his illness had erased, softened his eyes. Eleanor, he said, my name sounding like an official decree. The combination to the safe, the master codes, and the keys are in your dossier on my desk. You know what to do. Dismiss him. The screen went black. Not a fade, not a gentle transition. A sudden, absolute, swallowing black. The aftermath was a slow-motion study in structural collapse. For a long moment, no one moved. The projected blackness seemed to absorb all light and sound from the room. Then, movement began at the epicenter of the shockwave. Chloe didn't reach for Marcus to offer comfort or solidarity. She physically recoiled, pushing her chair back an inch with a sharp screech on the hardwood floor, putting tangible distance between herself and the source of her sudden downfall. She turned to him, and the look on her face wasn't one of wounded partnership. It was the pure, unadulterated disgust of an investor realizing her entire portfolio is comprised of fraudulent bonds. Her socialite composure shattered like cheap glass. "You lied to me," she seethed, her voice a strained, venomous whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the silent room. "You sat in our kitchen and you told me it was handled. You said the old man's grumbling was settled, that the debt was just accounting fiction. You told me we were secure." The word secure cracked in her throat. Her entire identity, the charity boards, the designer alliances, the whispered influence, was built on the premise of Marcus's unshakable financial footing. That premise had just been vaporized. Marcus seemed not to hear her. He was staring at the blank screen as if willing his father's image to reappear and declare it a monstrous joke. The ashen pallor of his skin had taken on a greenish, sickly tinge. A fine sheen of sweat gleamed on his forehead and upper lip. The performance was over, and the actor had forgotten all his lines. With a jerky, uncoordinated motion, he stumbled up from his chair, its legs scraping violently, and lurched toward my end of the table. He looked at me, and for the first time in our adult lives, I didn't see arrogance, boredom, or condescension in his eyes. I saw raw, animal panic. The kind of panic that short-circuits higher thought. Ellie, this is—" he stammered, his voice trembling, losing its usual baritone confidence. "This is insane. The medication, the cancer. He wasn't in his right mind at the end. You know that." He was paranoid, confused. This document, it's coercion, it's invalid." He was grasping at legal straws, his mind racing through a playbook of excuses that had always worked before. He took another step, his hand lifting as if to grab my wrist, but I shifted my weight back imperceptibly. "You can't do this," he pleaded, his voice dropping, trying to manufacture a moment of intimate brotherly connection. "We're family. You can't just fire family. This isn't how it works." I let his words hang and dissipate, offering no fuel for his desperation. I felt that glacial calm solidify into something diamond-hard. I reached into the sleek leather briefcase at my feet, the one that contained my actual work, not just performance props. I didn't pull out a dramatic, sealed envelope. Instead, I withdrew a single printed sheet of paper. I placed it on the polished mahogany between us, using 2 fingers to slide it perfectly into the space his abandoned chair had vacated. The action was clean, administrative, devoid of theatricality. "This is not about family, Marcus," I said, my voice measured, clear, and carrying the same steady tone I used in board meetings to explain quarterly shortfalls. "This is about fiduciary responsibility and settled accounts. As of 9 a.m. this morning, following the execution of the equity transfer clause, your electronic access to all Vance global systems, email, servers, financial platforms, has been permanently revoked. Your keycards have been deactivated. Your company credit lines are frozen." I tapped the paper lightly. "This document outlines a structured repayment schedule for the remaining $300,000 in personal obligations you still owe to the estate, separate from the converted equity. The first payment is due in 30 days. I would advise against being late. The terms for default are also included." He stared down at the sheet as if it were written in a cuneiform script he couldn't decipher. His eyes scanned the lines, the numbers, the official letterhead, but comprehension seemed to bounce off a newly erected wall in his mind. The reality was too vast, too final, to process. Around us, the spell broke. The board members, a collection of shrewd, weathered men and women who had built careers on reading power shifts, began the subtle ritual of disengagement. Leather briefcases snapped closed. Pens were collected. Quiet, murmured conversations about next steps and ensuring continuity bubbled up. The spectacle of our family drama was over. The practical business of the corporation, my corporation, remained. They were already shifting their focus, their body language angling slightly toward me, the new gravitational center in the room. I stood up, smoothing the non-existent wrinkle from my skirt. The movement felt different. Lighter. I collected my single sheet of notes, not the termination letter, but my actual agenda for the emergency leadership meeting that would commence in 20 minutes in the conference room downstairs. I didn't look back at Marcus, now a statue of ruin, or at Chloe, who had buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs of rage, not grief. My path to the door was clear. Mr. Alden was already there, holding it open. For 30 years, he had performed this same simple, respectful duty for my father. Today, he performed it for me. As I passed him, our eyes met again. No words were exchanged. His slight, almost imperceptible nod was more binding than any contract. It was a transfer of allegiance, an acknowledgement that the silent war was over, and order, a new, different order, had been restored, walking out of the law firm's hushed, climate-controlled environment and into the brisk city air felt like breaking the surface after a deep, prolonged dive. The sounds of traffic, the distant wail of a siren, the chatter of pedestrians, it all seemed sharper, more vibrant, more real. The sunlight, filtering through the concrete canyons, felt warmer on my skin. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the invisible, crushing weight of someone else's impending disaster on my shoulders. I was carrying the tangible, grounding weight of ownership. Mr. Alden's driver had the town car waiting at the curb. The man held the rear door open, another silent protocol observed. As the car pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back at the building. I looked forward. The route to corporate headquarters took us along the industrial spur that bordered the river. Halfway there, we passed the main Northeast distribution hub, the beating heart of Vance Global Logistics. A massive, sprawling complex of warehouses, loading bays, and admin buildings stretched over 50 acres. From the car window, I watched the orchestrated chaos, 18-wheelers lining up at the gates, forklifts darting like metallic insects inside giant open doors, container stacks reaching 4 stories high under the crane gantries. For a decade, this view had been a source of immense, often oppressive, responsibility. Every truck represented a promise to a client, every warehouse light burning at night represented a problem I might be called to solve, every union sticker on a hard hat represented a delicate negotiation I had to balance. It was a chain of duty, link by heavy link. Today, the view was different. It was a statement of fact. An asset. My asset. I hadn't won it in a genetic lottery, a random draw of chromosomal fortune. I hadn't maneuvered for it through social manipulation or leveraged parental affection. I had purchased it. I had acquired it with the only currency that truly matters in the end. 10,000 hours of unseen, unthanked labor. 10,000 hours spent in drafty freight offices at 3 a.m. during blizzards, rerouting shipments when airports closed. 10,000 hours spent mastering the arcane language of international tariffs and customs bonds. 10,000 hours spent listening to grizzled depot managers explain why a deadline was impossible, and then quietly, systematically, making it possible. Silence, I had learned, wasn't submission. That was their critical misreading of my character. My silence was strategic observation with compound interest. Every slight, every stolen idea Marcus presented as his own in a board meeting, every holiday meal I missed to put out a supply chain fire, it was all logged. Not in a ledger of resentment, but in a mental spreadsheet of evidence. I wasn't just doing a job, I was conducting due diligence on my own family, building an unassailable case for the day the system would inevitably crack under the weight of their incompetence. My phone, resting on the leather seat beside me, lit up with a push notification. The headline was brutally efficient. Socialite Chloe Montgomery Vance files for legal separation. Sources cite irreconcilable differences. The article would be live within the hour, no doubt fed by her own publicist in a desperate bid to control the narrative and salvage what remained of her brand. I didn't open it. I simply swiped the alert away, clearing it from the screen. It was administrative debris. A moment later, the phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was from the private island where Marcus kept, or rather, used to keep, his favorite yacht. I hit the red decline button without a moment's hesitation, then tapped the screen again to block the number permanently. I felt no surge of vengeance, no hot glow of schadenfreude. What I felt was cleaner, sharper, the pure, efficient satisfaction of a necessary correction. In logistics, we constantly run system diagnostics, identifying points of failure before they cascade into total network collapse. A failing bearing in a truck engine is replaced before it seizes. A vulnerable software server is patched before it's breached. Marcus and Chloe were not villains in a melodrama. They were critical points of failure in the human operational system of my life and my father's legacy. I had identified the flaw, sourced the replacement part, and executed the repair. The emotional equivalent of replacing a worn pump seal. It was maintenance. High stakes, personal maintenance, but maintenance nonetheless. The car glided into the underground executive garage of the Vance Global Tower. My designated spot, the one that had always been interim and slightly less convenient than Marcus's, was now mine by undisputed right. As I stepped out, I didn't see the reserved parking sign as a perk. I saw it as a coordinate. A fixed point on a map I now entirely controlled. The private elevator ride to the top floor was silent. When the doors parted directly into the executive suite anteroom, the staff, my father's long-serving assistant, the 2 junior analysts, the communications lead, were all at their stations. They didn't stand or applaud. That wasn't our culture. But they did look up, and in their eyes, I didn't see pity, confusion, or wary uncertainty. I saw recognition. They had been on the front lines with me during every crisis. They knew where the competence lived. The assistant, Miriam, simply gave me a firm, brief nod and said, "The Asia-Pacific crisis call has been moved to 2 p.m., as you requested. The draft press release is on your desk for final approval." The work continued. It was my work now. That night, in the quiet of my own apartment, not the family mansion, but a space I'd bought and decorated myself, I prepared for sleep. For the first time in a decade, a specific, recurring anxiety was absent. I didn't lie awake mentally drafting contingency plans for whatever new, extravagant mistake Marcus might have made that day. I didn't dream of sinking ships, of watching my father's life's work slip beneath dark, choppy waters while I desperately tried to bail with a thimble. The vessel wasn't just stabilized. It was finally, unquestionably, commanded by its chief engineer. The person who knew every stress point, every valve, every circuit, because they had built, repaired, or redesigned most of them with their own hands. The captain's chair wasn't a throne to be sat upon, it was a console to be operated. And I knew every switch. The following weeks unfolded not with drama, but with a deliberate grinding pace of institutional realignment. There were no screaming matches, no legal battles launched from Marcus's corner. The clause in the agreement, drafted by my father and Mr. Alden, was airtight, designed by masters of the craft to withstand the tantrums of a spoiled beneficiary. Marcus's lawyers, after a single costly review, advised settlement and compliance. The repayment plan for his remaining personal debt began, enforced by the same cold, automated systems that managed our vendor payments. Chloe's divorce proceedings became a footnote in the society pages, a fleeting scandal quickly replaced by the next. The company, far from being destabilized, experienced a quiet wave of relief. Morale in the operational divisions, the ones I had worked alongside for years, noticeably improved. Promotions were based on merit allocated to long-regarded infrastructure upgrades instead of branding gimmicks. The empire wasn't just under new management, it was under competent management. It was healing. I found my father's dossier exactly where he said it would be, in the locked drawer of his now my desk. It contained not just safe combinations and codes, but handwritten notes on every major division head, his unvarnished assessment of the board members, and a sealed, personal letter to me. I waited a month before opening it. His handwriting, once bold, was frail and spidery from the illness. It read, "Eleanor. A captain must love the sea, not the title. You have always loved the sea, its storms, its depths, its endless horizon. Marcus only ever loved the idea of wearing the captain's hat at the country club. Do not mourn what you have done. You haven't taken a kingdom. You have saved a ship. Keep her sailing. Dad. I filed the letter away. I didn't need the validation, but I treasured the understanding. This story isn't really about revenge, though it may feel that way. It's about valuation. How do we value labor? How do we value loyalty? How do we value legacy? For years, I bought into a false economy where I believed my silent competence would be weighed and found equal to my brother's born privilege. It was a market with rigged scales. My father, in his own ruthless, capitalist way, created a new market. He forced a transaction where the only accepted currency was the one I alone possessed, proven, paid for, demonstrable worth. He made me the buyer of last resort for my own birthright. In the end, I didn't defeat my brother. I simply outbid him. And I used his own debt as the capital to do it. The quiet, you see, is the most powerful sound in business. It's the sound of observation. It's the sound of calculation. It's the sound of equity accruing in an invisible account, compounding in the dark until the moment it's called upon to purchase the very world that ignored it. They mistook my silence for emptiness. They never realized it was the deep, humming silence of a reactor core, generating power they were too distracted to notice, until I used it to light up every shadow they tried to hide in. This story of quiet strategy, of turning patience into power, resonated with you, then you understand that true influence isn't seized, it's constructed, brick by invisible brick. This narrative is about more than family drama. It's a blueprint for strategic thinking in a world that often rewards the loudest voice, not the sharpest mind. Here at Winds of Thought, we dissect these blueprints. We explore the psychology of power, the architecture of strategy, and the untold stories of those who operate from the shadows until the moment they step into the light. If you want to master the art of strategic observation, if you believe in the compound interest of competence, then you're in the right place. Your engagement is the signal that tells us what matters. So, if you believe true leadership is built, not bestowed, hit that like button right now. Let us know this is the content you want more of. Let the algorithm, and us, know your stance. And I truly want to hear your perspective in the comments below. Was this a necessary, surgical boardroom coup to save a legacy? Or was it a ruthless, unforgiving family betrayal? There is no right answer, only fascinating debate. Share your verdict. Most importantly, if you don't want to miss our deep dives into strategy, power, and the human stories behind them, subscribe to Winds of Thought and turn on notifications. The next analysis is already in progress, and it might just change how you see your next move. Thank you for listening. This has been Winds of Thought.